The following readings are from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Did I turn this on? Yeah. Each week we read from both scriptures as prescribed by Yoganandaji and by his guru, Sri Yukteswarji, who was guided by Babaji to compare the two scriptures to show the same underlying truths between them. This week is titled, Why Do Devotees Fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Christ and earned for himself the opprobrium. What's opprobrium? I don't remember what that means.
The damnation, the criticism, the dislike.
Oh, yes. Lifetimes of dislike, let's call it that, of Christian from all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing, with his death, the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse and bare what was put therein. Then said Christ, Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it. Indeed, fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts towards other related attitudes. The importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the 2nd chapter, Sri Krishna states, If one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation. The delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the higher self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramahansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
A very good morning to you all. This story... before we get into this story, let me read the Whispers from Eternity. Prayer demand for removing the cork of ignorance, like a cork in a bottle. No more shall my consciousness remain bottled in this little vessel of flesh, corked with ignorance. No more shall I remain moving through the sea of cosmic consciousness, night and day, years, decades, and how many incarnations, so close, yet never able to contact thy sea. Through the bursting vibration of cosmic sound and the surging of thy holy name, I have removed the cork of ignorance which so long separated me from thee, though we lived together so closely. Now my body consciousness will meet thy all-surrounding, all-pervading consciousness. No longer will I walk heedlessly in thee, but never knowing and feeling thee. Thine image within me shall meet thine image everywhere. By releasing the I-ness in me, I will know that I am thou, and that thou alone art the little egos of us all. This subject, how do devotees fall, I think is very much on our minds from time to time. Hopefully it's not on our minds all the time. It would be rather nerve-wracking that way. And I think if we feel a little uneasy at this subject, or a little, how do devotees fall? Oh gosh, is that today? Don't worry, next week is, the title is Why Do Devotees Fall? The next week is How Devotees Rise. So, to be continued. In fact, next week we have a broadcast with Jyotish and Devi so that's already your answer right there. How devotees rise. Just watch them, be with them, be in that consciousness, rise automatically. The thing is that if we feel a little at this thought of how devotees fall, it's a good sign. If instead we were to say, how do devotees fall or why do devotees fall? I can skip that. I don't have any problem with that. I'm nowhere near falling. Look out. There's a funny statement there. This is in some dialogue between two people where this one guy is getting more and more assertive and aggressive and kind of criticizing his boss, and then his boss finally says, "You know that invisible line that you're never supposed to cross?" And the guy says, "Am I getting close?" And he says, "Look behind you." So the thing is, it's very important for us, if we have a love for God, if we have a love for the spiritual path, that we would feel I've finally returned to the spiritual path. I want to stay strong. I want to stay on it. And so I definitely don't want to fall. Sure. The other thing to remember when speaking about this subject is that a slip is not a fall. And this is something that Swamiji hints at when he says we should fear delusion, not in the sense of cowering before it, but in respecting that we can be affected by it. I'm paraphrasing. Why? Because when we're deluded, we don't necessarily know it. That's the problem. We're convinced, first of all, that I'm seeing things clearly. And or we may not even realize somehow when we're overcome with delusion that anything's wrong at all. There are signs, there are things that we can do to help ourselves. Again, this is part of the subject for next week's reading. But the thing is that delusion is very subtle, very it works through our own minds. This is why we can't think our way to God, because the mind is already infected with the disease that it's trying to get cured from, which is to say, in this case, ego. More than ego, but certainly ego. And so the lens through which we're peering is already colored or slanted in a particular way. So we have to take off the glasses, take off the contacts, take these layers off so that we really can see clearly. There are safeguards, and one of the first ones I want to mention is just loving God. If we love God, if our heart is open to God, we will invite His help, which is to say what? It doesn't mean that if we love Him enough, I love you so much. He says, well, how much do you love me? If you better love me enough, then I will give you one little tiny ounce of help. It's not that. God is desperately trying to help us constantly. But when we love Him enough, we open our hearts to receive that help. Okay? So just be clear. Sometimes when we find pettiness in human relationships, And what do I mean by pettiness? We expected love, and instead we found pettiness. This why did you do that? Sort of ouch. Did you have to say that to me on my birthday? This whole thing. Then we think God is that way. Because, I've known other people to be that way. My expectations were disappointed, so maybe this too. No. God was behind that thought that I want love. God is behind that feeling that I give love. God is the love itself. And honestly, God's love is the only love in this world. Any love that we're seeking is really God's love. Meaning, even if we find the perfect human love, and it is a blessing if you have that in your life through family members, through friends, through anyone. It's a real blessing, but even then, it's not satisfying enough, because God's love is even more, meaning it's satisfying on its own terms, but the devotee craves even more. I was talking to a friend, and I said, he was talking about his time before the spiritual path, and I said, we are, when we're devotees looking for God, you have to remember, sometimes people feel uncomfortable around people like us. It was kind of flipping the story, because it's like I was a devotee, I was looking for love and peace, and I was uncomfortable around everybody else. And but people are also uncomfortable around us because we're kind of intense people. And I said, we are seeking a love. We are thirsting for a divine satisfaction that I think people instinctively... Did I say thirsting? Thank you. Thirsting for a divine satisfaction that many people aren't interested in. Many people don't even know exists. And it's a pretty high bar. And people instinctively can feel, some of them, that they would never be able to satisfy that thirst of ours if we're looking for a deep friendship. I was saying to my friend, because, most people just want to be friends. And he said, I know, with one of my friends, I was saying, we must be as one. And I said, yeah, exactly. It's a little too much for most people. I'm not even sure I like you all that much. What to speak of, let us be as one. My God. And yet, I could fully relate that desire to merge. There's a desire for closeness, a desire for fulfillment, a desire, again, for merging. We can only merge into the infinite. So in a certain sense, those people we might be frustrated with, you are not meeting my needs. We have to be sure we're not asking something of them that only God can give. And you can say, well, yes, but they could at least be polite and kind and friendly and tactful and all that. True. But sometimes we attract those things in our lives to drive us home to God. Master said, God made his dream and made it a nightmare that we may all run to his eternal presence. Now you can say, but is that fair? And that's where I leave the subject, because I don't want to comment my thoughts on that, lest a lightning bolt strike me down. Master himself said it wasn't fair. But this story of how did Judas fall, and even the story of Judas and Jesus at all, is relatively unique in sort of the spiritual world. It's certainly not very common. When you read the Ramayana, both are the same thing, I guess, and the Mahabharata, all three, that I didn't have a very good sleep last night, and so I was trying really hard to mask that fact, but it came out. You don't really hear I can't think very easily of stories of betrayal of the guru that way. There are certainly evil people opposing the divine people, but they were sort of bad from the beginning. And, or there might be a little bit of, they had some positive traits too. But this sense of a close disciple betraying the guru is, again, it's fairly unique. And to make things even muddier, because Judas betrayed Jesus, what did Judas do? Long story short, the authorities were looking for Jesus. But it wasn't like he was on the internet and they just watched him on YouTube and that's how they knew what he looked like. It's not that they went to his Facebook page. There was no technology to sort of spread. So you might have heard of somebody, but you wouldn't know what they look like until you saw them. I mean, think about it. We even have photos of people. We've had photos of people for a long time, and this is before that. I mean, did somebody draw a sketch in the sand and make the eyebrows bigger or something like that? I mean, no way. Of course, you could draw with pencil and charcoal and all that, so maybe something, but still. So Judas, the authority, he made a deal with the authorities, the cops, were sent by the priests of that time. Why? Because Judas was sort of muscling in on their turf. He was edging in on their business, and literally a business, without commenting further about how temples and churches can be a business sometimes, that they said, we got to get rid of this guy. And so it was Judas, his own disciple, who told the people who were looking for Jesus where he was. And they said, he will be the one, follow me, and he will be the one that I kiss on the cheek. That's how you know him. And it's called a Judas kiss. You can imagine. It's makes your sort of skin crawl just hearing about it. But the thing is, there's more to the story than that, because Swamiji asked Master, was Judas a prophet? Meaning, was he a highly advanced soul? And Master said, yes, he would have had to be one of the 12 apostles. The apostles are sort of not only the direct disciples of Jesus, that's an easy way to think of it, there were 12 of them, but also the very close, and in a way the most advanced, the circle that he kept closest to him. So it wasn't that Judas was a thief the whole time and nobody knew and Jesus didn't realize. There was nothing that Jesus didn't realize. And so, like Krishna, like Rama, like other avatars, he was one with God. So he saw the whole story. But it had to play out in a certain way. So Judas was not this dark person. He did a dark deed. And, it was terrible, and we'll talk more about that. But how could he fall is the question. How could he have been so close, so uplifted, so, also in contact with Jesus for all those years, and then to fall from that? How, why, and so on. Because, first of all, it can help us as a cautionary tale. Just be careful. Because you know what happened to Judas. Not to say that we will go to anything that extreme, but just to say how these attitudes creep into the mind and to be on guard for them. Again, not afraid, not paranoid. Any little negative thought that comes into my mind, I'm 1 second away from leaving the path. It's not that. But especially as it relates to the Guru, especially as we relate to the Guru, is most important. Because as Master said, if you follow what the Guru says to you, it will help you. He says, and if he says no, it must be no. And you are saved from 100 complications. And we've told stories of that, how a man got a job and Master said, don't take that job. And then the person who did take that job was later imprisoned and Master was protecting the disciple. So many things. Master said to Swamiji, remember, you must do my will in all things, because I know what lies ahead for you, and you don't. And then Swamiji said, do I do your will in most things, Master? And Master said, in all the important things you do my will. So still, we want to cling. If we stay close to Master, if we hold fast to his hand, if we stay close to Swamiji, if we stay close to God, again, we are safe from 100 complications. So that's another simple answer. Even when Dharmini was reading, days before Judas's betrayal, we find Judas criticizing Jesus. And even their names sound a little similar, and it can sometimes be, you mean Jesus was criticizing Judas, right? The guru was saying, hey, no, it was the reverse. It was Judas criticizing Jesus. And you sort of go, okay, there's a hint right there. And we can say, yes, Judas, you should have thought of that. Okay, true. But then so should we. We should be careful when we find that critical thought coming in. So I want to read more about the story, because I don't know if it's extremely well known by everyone. This is from the other book, the book that came before this one. This is Rays of the One Light. The book that Swamiji wrote first was Rays of the Same Light, which has longer commentaries, which we sometimes read also during Sunday satsang. In the Bible, it says, this is the story of near the end of Jesus' life. There the disciples made Jesus a supper, and Martha served. And if you've ever heard of Martha, it's not surprising that Martha was the one serving. And then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, and spikenard is jadamansi, which is very costly, probably costly because it was imported from India, is my guess. Seriously. And anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then said one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot — Iscariot was his last name — the one who would betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Meaning the money given to the poor. The Bible says, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and kept the purse, and bare what was put therein. Meaning he kept an eye on, 2 for you, 1 for you, 2 for me. Then said Jesus, let her alone, against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. And see, of course, Dharmini read that just earlier, but people say that Jesus spoke in riddles and concealed his true meaning, and of course that was true. But this is pretty straightforward. You always have the poor with you to serve. Me you don't have always. I mean, hint, hint. That even the time may be drawing to a close. On the other hand, even Master hinted that before his Mahasamadhi, I have a big day tomorrow. Wish me luck. And everyone said, good luck, thinking he was nervous about his lecture that he was going to give. And so there's also something, I think, that covers up. Although one of the disciples said to Swamiji, I don't think it will be very long. And even near the end of Swamiji's life, we had sort of this feeling that he might live many more years, as was predicted by Agastya, or he might leave the body soon. It was sort of, I was still a complete shock, but there was this hint of that it might be soon. In fact, one friend of ours said to us, I feel it may be soon, and of course I wanted to just say, no, take it back. But the best part of the story is that connection with the Guru goes on. So Swamiji writes, this episode took place only a few days before Jesus' crucifixion. How strange it is to think that Judas, so close a disciple as to have been named by Jesus among the 12 apostles, could have betrayed his master. Yet here, less than a week before that tragic event, the symptoms of his betrayal are clearly manifested. What sincere disciple would correct his spiritual teacher, especially in spiritual matters, as though he himself were the wiser? There's our first hint, right there. As soon as that thought comes into someone's mind, some abstract someone, that I'm going to, the guru doesn't really know this, and I might need to tell him, or even if I don't tell him, I know that I do know it better, and so on. It's an alert. It's a warning sign. And what's one antidote for that? Who cares? Who knows what is better? I mean, it's sort of like, if somebody were to meet Master and say, I bet my Tamil's better than your Tamil. Of course, he would say, my Bengali is probably better than your Bengali. I do have a friend, though. It was amazing. I asked her she said, I read the autobiography in Bengali. I said, really? And then I said, how did you learn Bengali? She said, I had a neighbor who was Bengali. It's like, I've had neighbors who are Bengali too. I didn't suddenly not only learn the language, but then read autobiography of a yogi. There's some big words in that book in Bengali. Well, anyway, so I said, so you are one of those people, brilliant people. The mystery of how Judas fell so far from the high trust that had been placed in him is one of the most absorbing in all history. From what we gather in the New Testament of the Bible, he was highly intelligent. And remember what Sri Yukteswar said. The sword of intelligence is two-edged. It can be used to cut the boil of ignorance or else decapitate oneself, meaning by accident. But that people who are too smart, if there's not love, if there's not heart quality, we can still get into all kinds of trouble. And the best part about that is that Sri Yukteswar was the most intelligent also, in addition to being an avatar of anyone. So you could never say, he was the smartest one in the room, in every room. From what we can gather, I said that already. He was highly intelligent, handsome, personable, and magnetic. Many among the followers of Jesus, one imagines, considered him the Master's foremost disciple, if only because one so susceptible to the delusion of pride would have made no secret of his abilities. It's always fun when we encounter pride in others, especially so that it helps remind us about ourselves. Swamiji gave, for example, the advice. He said, when someone has a good idea, don't say, yes, I had the same idea myself. And I thought, because I say that sometimes. I was thinking that I was saying, I agree with you, I'm on the same page with you, we are in sync, but I wasn't, because I have had the same idea myself. Who cares what the idea is? And, who had the idea and so on. The idea is either true or isn't. It doesn't matter the source of the idea. And anyway, I met someone recently who I knew all about him because my parents had told me about his sort of business accomplishments and so on. But when he met me, he said, "Hi, how are you?" And I came here, I stopped by checking on several of my businesses in the area before I came to the cafe here to meet you, because there are several. And I said, wonderful. It's just sort of just so you know in whose presence you are. But again, like I said, it can so easily help us then look for that impulse in ourselves. Just so you know, I'm pretty good too. Okay, to come back. On what possible grounds could such an outstanding disciple have ended up so utterly deluded? That his criticism in this passage was leveled at Jesus rather than at Mary is clear. For although Mary was anointing the Master's feet, she did so only with Jesus' consent, and continued to do so until the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Although Judas's intellect became clouded, he was never a fool, and only a fool would have imagined himself Jesus' equal in wisdom. On what possible grounds, then, could Judas have presumed to rival Jesus? His reasoning must have gone something like this. In the conceit or pride he felt in his own practical nature, he must have looked at Jesus and thought, "The Master is a great soul, and I believe in him deeply. I believe he could be the salvation of our people. But What a way to fulfill such a glorious destiny! Who will listen to him, sleeping casually as he does on the ground, mixing with the lower classes, and scorning the leading religious figures of our day? Is it possible that he's actually indifferent to his mission? He tells us not to be concerned for the morrow. That isn't what you'd expect of a man with a mission. He laughs, he sings, he tells quaint little stories, and he talks as though we all lived in eternity, instead of here, in measurable time and on solid earth. I do believe in Jesus, but, well, let's face it, the man's head is in the clouds. How can anyone so unworldly understand how to get his teachings accepted on the scale they deserve? The sad truth is, great though he is, Jesus is not a practical man. How many times did people say that about Master, and I've heard people say that about Swamiji. My God. I mean, he had created all these communities. Master had come to this country and started this whole work out of nothing, just speaking on a practical level. And I remember one person saying, he wasn't a businessman because she was a businesswoman. I didn't want to point out to her that her great business she had inherited. Perhaps Judas never dared to voice even to himself the next logical step in his reasoning, which would have gone thus: Jesus may be wise spiritually, but he lacks my own down-to-earth practical skills. Judas must have tried to persuade his master to tailor his public image to fit the expectations of those in positions of power, the Pharisees and high priests, and anyone else who represented the establishment of their day. Oh, he would have never urged the master to adopt their behavior. He would have pleaded only that Jesus respect their ways and make his teachings more generally acceptable to them. After all, acceptance at high levels of society would guarantee that success which the master's mission so clearly deserved. Instead, Jesus denounced the authorities. Good heavens, Judas must have thought. Those very persons who were the most important to his mission. How could he be so blind to the rules governing worldly success? Indeed, Jesus even scoffed at worldly success. Brooding, as Jesus must have done, on the master's indifference to what we today would call public relations, he must, one imagines, have identified ever more deeply with the establishment. From his growing worldliness, it would have been but a step to the delusion of money attachment, for on wealth it is, finally, that worldly power rests. The Gospel states plainly that Judas was a thief, but he could not have been one to start out with. His dishonesty must have developed gradually, and it seems very likely that he justified stealing from his own spiritual teacher with some such rationalization as, Jesus deserves to lose his money. Maybe this is the only way to teach him that wealth does, in fact, count for something in our world. On the other hand, could Judas have offered this line of reasoning to others, however much he nourished it in the privacy of his own thoughts? Anyone, as anxious as Judas was to be accepted by others, would have conjured up only the most acceptable reasons for anything he suggested. Thus he spoke of selling the ointment and giving the proceeds to the poor. His arrogance, his mental aloofness from the master, and his concern with self-justification rather than with truth led finally to his act of supreme betrayal. So again, these are hints to watch out for ourselves. Any sense of arrogance, mental aloofness from the master, and concern with self-justification rather than with the truth. Now, it's easy to sort of sit, over a cup of tea and say, I will watch out for those. But the thing is that when delusion comes, we may not even recognize arrogance for what it is, mental aloofness. Mental aloofness is not something that you think. Am I mentally aloof? How aloof? it's something that you feel or that you don't feel. Meaning, if we feel warmth, if we feel love, if we feel joy, thinking of our Master, then we are not mentally aloof. Mentally aloof, another way to think of it, is too much in the head, not enough in the heart. And so, if we sort of feel, no, that's fine, I'm sure I feel some warmth in the heart somewhere, that's a warning. Then it's good to chant. It's good to do something to bring that love back into the heart, which is to say, to open the heart, so we can feel that love. And also, I remember once, because we can also go through, this is a little different of a story because it's to do with being in the Master's presence, but Swamiji talked about how he would get frustrated with different things Master said, or he would be hurt, or he would be confused. And, that happens in the course of relating to a person when we don't have, full realization and so on of everything that he's doing or who he is or whatever. And in other words, it's understandable. It didn't lessen Swamiji. He got through whatever tests it was. And honestly, if he had never been confused, that means he would have never have been tested. He just would have come in perfect, and then, his autobiography, The New Path, would just, have 2 words: be perfect. And we say, okay, that's the lesson I'm going to try to follow and fail at miserably. We're not perfect. Master talks about how he was frustrated with Sri Yukteswar at times, or I quivered under his proverbial hammer or something, not literal hammer, but all the criticisms and so on. And when when Sri Yukteswar had criticized Master to his own father and said, your son, and so on. And Master's father came and saw Master, and he was between laughter and tears. He said, from your guru's description, I expected to find you a wreck. And then Master came to Sri Yukteswar and said, Sir, was that just to criticize me before my father? And Sri Yukteswar said, I will not do it again. And Master said, to see the lion of Bengal bow meekly before me, the moment was savored to the fullest. You see, again, and he goes on, which maybe is worth mentioning. He said that Master's only reason for displeasure with me at the time is I was trying to convert a certain man onto the spiritual path. Well, that man was, what was his name? Dhirananda, Swami Dhirananda. Master gave him the name. His name was Bakshi, that he was born with. And he was the one who tried to betray Master. He tried to destroy his work in America and stole so much money from Master and created so much trouble for him. And did Sri Yukteswar see it? Yes. And he was trying to spare Master that suffering. Did Master not see it? He did see it. He told when they were children, meaning they were young boys together, and Master told another friend of his, someday Bakshi will betray me. He knew, but he also knew as the guru that he had to try to help him. So remember that also. Master went through a lot of trouble, through all these lawsuits and so on, and bad publicity, and in the end it all worked out fine for him because, it made, anyway, it worked out okay. But that the guru knew he had to help him anyway. And what did he say of Dhirananda? He said he will find God in 3 lifetimes. So again, Dhirananda was a close disciple of Master's, and Master, I don't know if he said he is my Judas, but he used that phrase of another disciple, sorry to say. But he never took it personally, like, how dare you? He's just basically the way a good father will love the children even if they're misbehaving, even if they're criminal. They will still love them, if nothing else, out of a sense of obligation that, look, our fates are linked and I have to help you. It doesn't mean they don't help with tough love or discipline or whatever, but they still help. They still feel that obligation, and the guru feels that obligation to us too. So remember, he will always be watching us, even or especially when we're struggling with delusion. So trust that too. And be humble and be open to his help. But also this self-justification. I remember once Swamiji was correcting me and for something that I had felt wasn't necessarily justified, that I hadn't really done. And I was struggling against this thought because I wanted to be open to him. And yet I also felt, but that's not even true. And did somebody tell you that? I didn't say anything, but I felt myself getting frustrated. And I felt tempted to close my heart just so I wouldn't have to feel the discomfort of what I felt was unwarranted criticism. And I didn't want to close my heart, but I was tempted to self-justify. Actually, at least this is my reading of that event, and it wasn't exactly the way, did someone tell you? But I sort of felt in myself, nobody loves you more than he does. And so I didn't close my heart, but it was a struggle in that moment to just go, okay, fine. Go ahead, say whatever you want, I'm not listening anymore. And I didn't want to do that, but I had to fight to not do that. Judas fell so deeply into the delusion of money attachment that he was capable, like one in a dream, of accepting the offer of silver from the chief priests for paying his master. They said, tell us who Jesus is and we'll give you 30 pieces of silver. So if you ever hear that phrase, 30 pieces of silver, it's a bad thing. So anybody who knows it knows what they're saying. So 30 pieces of silver? Sure, 30 pieces of gold, silver? Okay, I'll take silver. Don't take it. Lest anyone doubt the extraordinary power of delusion to draw people into actions diametrically opposed to everything in which they themselves most deeply believe, the fate of Judas must serve forever as a salutary, meaning healthy or health-producing, lesson, even a terrifying one. For no one is safe from delusion, no matter how brilliant he may be, until he is established in God consciousness. This is why Jesus' stress on direct inner communion with God is so vitally important for every devotee. For only by dwelling consciously in the Lord's presence can one escape the subtle web of delusion, a web spun by egocentricity and influenced in the spinning by satanic delusion itself. A separate, though closely related issue is the deep mystery, what is Satan? This subject will be discussed in a later commentary. You can imagine Swamiji saying, I've already sort of given you enough in this one. What is Satan? That'll be a little later. Meanwhile, let us reflect on the scorn with which the rabbis of the temple treated Judas once he had awakened to the enormity of his sin. Judas realized, remember that too, what a mistake he had made. So if he had wanted Jesus to be killed, if he had been killed, Judas might have said, great, that's exactly what I wanted. Instead, he felt horrified. And so elsewhere, Swamiji and Master explain, Judas must have felt that he was trying to force Jesus to save himself. If only he could perform some miracle, then everybody would see, okay, here is a true master. So, if he gets captured and is threatened with death, surely he will save himself. Even Jesus himself said, if I could summon legions of angels, brigades of angels from my Father. He said that in that time. So again, the thought was out there that he could save himself. But Master said if he had saved himself, meaning considering that his body was his reality, then he would have lost God for incarnations. He didn't save himself. And that is what, was brought horror to Judas. And the priests, they scorned Judas. Judas took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it back at their feet. And, it was blood money. And so he didn't keep it. And they mocked him. Oh, oops, this got knocked around. Okay, here we are. For thus too does the world eventually treat everyone who betrays his own high principles in the hope of courting the world's favor. See? people will say, why do you be so spiritual? And you say, okay, fine, I'll do something else a little less spiritual. And then they go, huh? Yeah. See, I knew you weren't so pure. You just can't win. Master said, Satan is consistent in only one thing. He always breaks his promises. Worldly people, after all, have their principles too. Whosoever would compromise his own ideals will never find himself truly welcomed anywhere. God first, God last, God all the time. This is what Master said. This forever must be the motto of the devotee. So, just a few points. Just to finish the story, what Master said was, because Judas, after throwing those pieces of silver at the priests and realizing what a mistake he had made, he ended his own life. And Master said he should not have. So there is a deep teaching right there. I mean, who could really imagine a worse mistake or a worse sin than what Judas had done? Meaning anything else anybody else has done is not as bad as that. And Master said he should not have ended his life. He should have gone into the mountains, Master said, and meditated and expressed his remorse to God, prayed for forgiveness, and tried to work out his karma through meditation. Because why? I mean, even if you end your life, so what? You end up in the next life, and then you have to meditate and pray for forgiveness. And, so I mean, might as well get started now. Why wait for the next life? And so again, if we ever feel that we have made some big mistake, now, in the past, whatever, just remember, of Judas, Master said, just meditate, pray for forgiveness, and so on. You see? So that's one very healthy and helpful example, that, look, it's not as bad as that, it's okay. And even if it was as bad as that, for whom it was as bad for, Judas was as bad as Judas in his mistake, still, meditate, express your remorse, and pray for forgiveness, which is there, but in other words, work out the karma. That's it. And another thing, the most important part, when you think of Judas, of his betrayal of Jesus, of his criticism of the Guru, of turning in his Guru and having his Guru murdered directly as a consequence of his betrayal, wasn't even an accident, and that's an important point too. Master said the first law of God is loyalty, and especially to the Guru, especially to God. And he said, therefore also the greatest sin before God is treachery. Because, he said, moral sins are committed in error and in weakness, often against one's will. I know I'm not supposed to have the 15th piece of Mysore Pak, but can't help it. Can't help it. That part. Those are committed in weakness, even again, against our will. But he said, but treachery is deliberate. When people betray someone, they know what they're doing. And it's terrible. And so then the greatest sin before God Judas had committed and had with these terrible consequences. So what should you take away from this? That Master said Judas found God. Judas is liberated, not through, obviously, all those mistakes. But he said, I knew Judas in this lifetime. Master met Judas, his reincarnation. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramhansa. And he said he found God in this life. He had 2,000 years of suffering around it, in either this world or the astral world or whatever. But he's free. Story's over. He's probably with Jesus right now. Hopefully not having bread, because that was part of the story, is that Jesus and Judas, they both reached for the same piece of bread. So that's where it all starts. No, I'm kidding. But they did. And then Jesus said to Judas, go and do what you have to do. So he even knew. But the story is over. Judas is one with God now. I wouldn't recommend that journey. But the point is, it's all over. He's free. In fact, some of the disciples used to tease this disciple who was Judas, Master said. Some of Ramakrishna's disciples would tease him because he was still a little attached to money. And Ramakrishna said once, leave him alone. If you knew the whole story, just leave him alone. He suffered enough. So, any mistakes we make, any falls that we do have, suppose we're trying so hard to avoid a fall, and despite that we still fall, so what? Just get up, dust ourselves off, and keep going. Our destiny, the only destination we have, is God. That's it. That's our home. That's where we're all headed. We can go slowly, we can go quickly. We can go willingly, we can go kicking and screaming. But we're all going home to God. So let's do what we can to go home quickly. God bless you.